Today, we're going to dive deep into one of the Quran's most profound and honestly most fascinating mysteries, the disjoined letters. We're going to focus on a very specific set of them that appear right at the start of the 7th chapter, Surah Al-Araf, Aleph, Lam, Mim, Sod. And trust me, this isn't just some linguistic puzzle. It's really a doorway into understanding the very nature of divine revelation itself.
So, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the enigma itself. Then, we'll walk through the different scholarly theories, step by step. We'll start with the more external ideas about their form and function, and then we'll journey into the deeper, more spiritual meanings, everything from a connection to God's greatest name to the idea that it's all a divine code. And finally, we'll try to unpack the wisdom behind why this mystery even exists in the first place.
All right, let's get right to the heart of it. The moment you open that 7th chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Araf, you're immediately face to face with something that just challenges your normal way of reading.
Aleph, Lam, Mim, Sod. They're pronounced one by one, not as a single word. These 4 letters are the very first thing you encounter. It's not a word you can look up in a dictionary. It's not a sentence. It just stands there. 4 letters of the Arabic alphabet, presenting this immediate, profound mystery that kind of stops you in your tracks before you've even read the first real verse.
And that right there is the big question. It's the one that scholars, mystics, and thinkers have been wrestling with for over 1,400 years. What on earth do these letters mean? Why are they here, right at the beginning of a divine chapter? This question is really going to be our guide through this whole analysis.
Now, what's really important to know is that this isn't a one-time thing. This phenomenon of starting a chapter with these disjoined letters, in Arabic they're called the hurufi muqatta'at, it actually happens 29 times in the Quran. And that repetition is key. It tells us this isn't some random fluke or a typo. It's a deliberate, significant feature of the book, a recurring pattern that's basically demanding our attention. So, let's move on and start exploring some of the theories. We'll begin with what you might call the exoteric interpretations, the ones that focus on the outside, the practical function these letters might have had when they were first revealed. Okay, so one of the biggest classical theories is that these letters are a form of tahaddi, a divine challenge. And this challenge was aimed directly at the people of 7th century Arabia, a culture that considered poetry and eloquence to be the absolute pinnacle of human achievement. The argument here is actually incredibly elegant. Imagine God speaking to a people who are the undisputed masters of language and saying, look, here are your building blocks, your alphabet. Aleph, Lam, Mim, Sod. These are the very same letters you use to create your most beautiful poems. I've used those exact same letters to create this book. If you really think a human wrote this, then you, as the masters of this craft, should have no problem creating something just like it. It's like showing them the raw ingredients to prove that the final recipe is something only a divine chef could create. It's a constant, silent proof of the Quran's miraculous nature.
But, good scholars always ask the tough questions. And a natural objection came up. If the whole point of these letters is to issue this big challenge, then why aren't they at the beginning of all 114 chapters? The source material we're looking at does acknowledge this, but it kind of sees it as a weak objection. The idea is that you don't have to repeat a challenge in every single instance for it to still be valid.
All right, so let's look at another idea. This one's a bit more practical. It shifts the focus from a deep theological proof to a clever rhetorical strategy that was perfect for the time and place of the revelation. You really have to picture what it was like in Mecca back then. Whenever the Prophet Muhammad tried to recite the Quran, his opponents would intentionally make a racket, shouting, clapping, just creating chaos to stop people from hearing the message. Now, in that noisy environment, imagine starting a recitation not with a normal sentence, but with the stark, strange, and powerful sounds of Alif, Lam, Mim, Sod. It would have been totally jarring. It would have just sliced right through all that noise, made everyone stop, and sparked their curiosity. It was a divine way to get everyone to just listen. But here's the thing. We run into the same problem as before. If this was such a brilliant way to grab a hostile audience's attention, why was it only used sometimes? The fact that it's only in 29 chapters suggests that, yeah, this might have been one of its functions, but it probably wasn't the whole story. There's likely something deeper going on.
Okay, what about a really simple explanation? A third theory suggests that maybe these letters are just the titles. They're simply the names of the chapters they introduce. And this is where you can really see the limits of that idea.
I mean, on the one hand, it works perfectly for a couple of famous examples. Everybody knows the 20th chapter as Surah Taha and the 36th as Surah Yasin. But the argument just completely breaks down for the others. Absolutely nobody calls the second and longest chapter of the Quran, Surah Alif Lam Mim. We all know it as Surah Al-Baqarah, the cow. Same goes for the chapter we're talking about, Surah Al-Araf. So this theory only works in a couple of cases, which means it can't be the universal rule. So, we've looked at the outside theories. Now, let's go deeper. We're going to transition into the more profound spiritual interpretations. Let's explore the incredible idea that these letters aren't just tools or titles, but the actual building blocks of God's most powerful name. Now, to get this, we first have to understand a concept called the Ism al-Azam. This is literally the greatest name of God. Islamic theology teaches that this is a name of God so powerful, so sacred, that any prayer you make using it is absolutely guaranteed to be answered. But its exact form is one of the most protected divine secrets, known only to the highest prophets, to safeguard its immense power. Okay, now here is where it gets really mind-bending. This theory says that all those disjoined letters across the 29 chapters are anything but random. If you were to gather all of them, Alif Lam Mim, Alif Lam, Ra, Kaf, Ha, Ya, Ain, Sad, and all the rest, and then you took out all the duplicates, you'd be left with exactly 14 unique letters. The theory is that these 14 letters are the primordial elements, the very building blocks from which the greatest name of God is made. So the letters in the Quran are like divine clues, pointing us towards the ultimate reality of God.
And to give you a sense of just how powerful this connection is, the source gives us this incredible narration. It says that Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, is closer to the greatest name than the black of the eye is to its white. What a powerful image. It just emphasizes the incredible spiritual power and closeness contained in these words, and by extension, the very letters they're made of.
And that leads us to probably the most common understanding among many, many scholars, especially those with a more mystical view. It's an idea that takes all the majesty and secrecy we've been talking about and suggests these letters are, quite simply, a divine code. So the core of this idea is that these letters were never meant for you and me to figure out like a crossword puzzle. They are a Rams, a secret, a private message, a kind of divine cipher. The meaning is known only to the sender, God, and the one intended recipient, the Prophet Muhammad. It's a layer of revelation that's so direct, it bypasses normal human language. It's a communication from God straight to the heart of his prophet. Okay, so the big obvious question here is, why? The Quran says over and over again that it's a clear guide for all of humanity. So why would it have secrets that are impossible for us to access? Well, the answer to that actually tells us something really profound about how the Quran is structured. The reason for this public secret is brilliant, really. For one, it's a powerful lesson in humility. It shows us that this book has oceans of knowledge. There are shores everyone can access, but there are also depths that are just beyond our reach. It also highlights the incredibly unique spiritual status of the prophet as the only person who could receive this kind of direct, coded knowledge. And finally, it's a subtle proof of the Quran's divine origin. I mean, think about it. What human author writes a guidebook and then puts in an unbreakable code? Its very presence points to a source that's beyond human. So this idea of a secret code isn't just something scholars made up. It actually connects directly to how the Quran describes itself and its own verses. This framework is right there in the text. You see, the Quran says its verses come in two main types. First, you have the muqammat. These are the clear, solid, unambiguous verses. They're the foundation of the book, the mother of the book, as it's called. They give us the clear rules for law and belief. But then you have the mutashabihat. These are the ambiguous, the allegorical, the multi-layered verses. Their meanings aren't obvious on the surface and are meant to be pondered and interpreted by people who are deeply rooted in knowledge. And like I said, this isn't just an interpretation. The Quran itself tells us this. In the 3rd chapter, Surah Al-Imran, it says, "He it is who has sent down to you the book. In it are verses that are decisive, and others are allegorical." That verse right there gives us the divine framework for this whole discussion. So within this framework, there's a huge scholarly consensus. When it comes to the mutashabihat, these ambiguous verses, pretty much everyone agrees. The disjoint letters are the ultimate example. They are the clearest example of something that isn't clear. They are ambiguity in its purest, most intentional form. This brings us to the big finale.
Now that we understand what these letters are, ambiguous verses, we have to ask the most important question of all. Why? What's the ultimate wisdom in putting a deep mystery right at the heart of a book that's supposed to be a clear guide?
It feels like a total paradox, right? If the point of revelation is to bring light and clarity, why would you intentionally put in verses that are by their very design unclear? Well, it turns out that the ambiguity itself serves a critical purpose in a person's spiritual and intellectual journey.
The wisdom here is just incredible. First, it's a huge test of faith. It asks us to trust in God's wisdom, especially when we don't understand. It's also an intellectual engine. These mysteries have fueled 14 centuries of scholarship, pushing people to dive deeper into the Quran's ocean of knowledge. It's a constant lesson in humility, a built-in reminder that no matter how smart we think we are, our knowledge is nothing compared to God's. And finally, the Quran itself says these verses act as a kind of filter. People who have disease in their hearts will latch onto the ambiguity to create confusion, and in doing so, they just reveal their own bad intentions.
And that leads us to this stunning conclusion. What if the point isn't to solve the puzzle? What if the mystery is the message? The simple fact that letters like Aleph, Lam, Mim, Sod are incomprehensible to almost everyone is itself a powerful form of communication. It's proof that this book comes from a divine source, and it's a direct test of our own sincerity and humility before our Creator.
So now I have to turn the question over to you. After walking through all these layers, from a clever rhetorical trick to a divine code, from a literary challenge to a deep test of faith, how do you see this divine mystery now? What does its existence teach us about the nature of knowledge, about the limits of our own minds, and about our relationship with the divine? The letters themselves remain silent, but their mystery speaks volumes.